funding to support Toronto Police Services immediate response to increase community safe. We do have a deputation. Miguel, welcome. You know, I've never had a deputant ask me to hold the time. Thanks, Miguel.
Oh my God, you guys are very fast this morning, really fast. Let's start with this conversation about the increasing of $1.5 million made by the, as you are aware, John Tory requested we approved the hiring of 200 this year, 2019 budget. John Tory, on his letter, he's requested $5 million from the city tax stabilization reserve, which is, I think, City Hall has been asked before to subsidize the cost of TTC fares for people who cannot afford it. Use the money to help people who have lost everything due to bed bugs, and they need to buy, furniture. So, what a suggestion, a bold suggestion, I can highlight it. This is the budget services board. Councillor Carroll may be aware of that one. This is the line 85. It deals with legal indemnification requests. $1.6 million. So I wonder, why cannot go back to the police union and tell them, look, 300 police officers, why don't we just invest in our communities instead? That's what we should be doing. That is the answer to our gun violence. We are not investing enough in our communities, but here we to comply with the request of the mayor that we need to have $1.5 million more. I want to bring to you a story. This is the case of a teenager who got arrested and brutalized by Toronto police. He was only 14 years old. What a shame. And you know what's the problem here? These cops are going to stay home collecting money. Union agreement. And the problem is, we, the city, pay for their legal indemnifications to have a... We, the public, we have zero, nada to represent us when we have problems with the Toronto police. So how is it possible budget when they behave in such a manner, abusively of children, poor children that live in communities like... But this one happened in North York. Look at this chart. This is from the CBC News. This is what an example how much you pay on property tax. $3,000. Much of it is to cover the police services board services. Look at the bottom of the list. Child care expenses. We only spent $59.28. That's a shame. We should increase that amount so we don't have to struggle with child care spaces. Just ask Mike Layton. He has a child. He has reportedly having problems with that. So we should be investing again in our communities. In our communities. This is what the way we should go to, because we know the answer to violence is guns. So I support the banning of guns. That is the model that we should ask John Tory to ask his buddy Justin Trudeau to help to join us and stop the selling of guns in the city of Toronto. That is the way to go. Wake up!
Thank you, Miguel. We'll go now to the item. There are questions of staff. I'll begin with Councillor Layton.
I'm not sure who's going to be able to answer this question about what are going to spend the 4.5 million on? Just out of curiosity, I'm looking for something a little bit more specific than deployment of additional resources or a response to increased levels of gun violence. What is this money going to go towards?
It's Deputy Raymer, sir. We're redeploying resources. There'll be a lot of additional resources deployed through overtime and callbacks. It's equipment for those additional resources, because within our current fleet of vehicles and that, we cannot staff or supply the vehicles for the additional resources that will be deployed. It's also equipment, particularly with respect to our work in terms of intelligence and technical operations.
So equipment for the callbacks, cars.
Yeah.
I don't suspect individually you need to buy more equipment for officers, but a division would need a couple more vehicles.
That's correct. So we have we've gone on a 3 months lease for 62 vehicles.
You're going to lease 62 vehicles for 3 months?
That's correct.
And are they you're going to paint them like police cars?
No, they won't. They'll be unmarked police.
These will be unmarked vehicles. And then the surveillance, the final line item, is that CCTV cameras? Is capital investment? Is it an investment that will continue to exist after?
There will be budgeting for the purchase of 40 additional CCTV cameras, but that is above and beyond the 4.5 million that we're talking about here.
So that's somewhere else in
That's correct.
The budget. Then what type of equipment is that third item? I'm just wondering what.
What third item are we speaking of?
Well, you said it was the equipment, the overtime and callbacks, and then you said there was an additional amount of money being spent on operations.
It's essentially equipment and overtime and callbacks.
Okay. So the vehicles and the callbacks are the two.
Yeah, but there's also technological equipment that I'm really not in a position to elaborate on, but there's that aspect in terms of our intelligence operations as well.
So can you give me an idea about what the ratio is between the vehicle leases, the overtime and callbacks, and this unknown technology?
I don't have. Let me see. The vast majority of the money is callbacks and overtime.
Okay.
We are actually at this point in time, though, tracking to be significantly underspent because we're having difficulty filling because of the demand on the officers through the normal course of operations as well.
And it's toward the end of the year. Typically, this is the time you get difficulty finding people to fill overtime.
Well, it's been a long year.
Summer.
We've had people working hard through the summer as well, so it does get a little bit more difficult. Yes.
Yeah. So you're looking at underspending, or like you're having a difficult time finding the callbacks. Is there a way of addressing that?
Well, we're still working on it. On our investigative side of the house, we're tracking to be using the allotted amount. But on the uniform side, we're having difficulties. So we're looking for other areas in the organization for people to step up and commit to some of those operations in terms of going back into uniform for high visibility policing.
Okay, thank you very much. This is just to our CFO, but you may need to delegate some of these numbers off. Do you know how much we spend on our poverty reduction file, sort of writ large?
I'll have to get back to you.
And anyone, or like the youth strategy, the implementation of the youth strategy, can anyone give me a number for, like, what do we spend across the corporation for either of those two things? Okay. That's fine. I think for council, that's enough time. We got lots to lead up.
So anticipate those questions coming at council. Councillor Carroll, did you have questions? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, I guess I'll go to speakers. Councillor Carroll, I believe.
Yeah, I'll put my motions right on so that they can be part of the discussion. The first one, do the general one first, and It's self-explanatory. People will recall their request. The City Council, in light of the recent spate of gun violence, requests the federal government to reconsider City Council's earlier request in item 2019 CC 44.14, immediate steps to address gun violence, to fund the unfunded applications under the National Crime Prevention Grant, totaling $26.2 million over the next 5 years, and requests the City Clerk to forward this request to all members of Parliament. Toronto members of Parliament, that is. And the financial motions are as follows: that City Council increase the 2019 operating budget for social development, finance and admin to implement 1 year of the Towards Peace program, Towards Peace program, funding of 1.292 gross and net to be provided from a one-time draw from the city's tax stabilization reserve. And the part 2 is that City Council direct the Executive Director of SDF&A to include year 2 funding for Towards Peace as part of the 2020 budget submission. So, councillors, this morning we adopted the operating variance program, and what it projects is that by the end of the year you will have a $98.8 million variance in corporate accounts, not overall, in corporate accounts. That means it's not an accident of squeezing departments or anything. That's an overage in terms of our investment earnings. It's an overage in terms of what we projected in MLTT. This morning in the Globe and Mail real estate section, they said we can expect that trend to continue because implausibly we actually still do have a slight shortage of condo dwellings, and so condo prices remain strong and the traffic is good. That's what it says this morning in the Globe and Mail. So if you're going to have that almost $100 million at the end of the year, not from squeezing service delivery anywhere, my financial motion is saying if out of the property tax stabilization reserve you can come up with $1.5 million for policing to deal with violence, what we heard the community say loud and clear, Mr. Avila is reflective of our community. He showed us activists marching down streets, but I can tell you in the most affluent of my communities, when I e-blasted about this summer, what I got back from the most unlikely sources was, yes, address the roots of violence. Policing is not going to do it. Please invest in the roots of violence. The following week we got the announcement of these monies from other orders of government, and the Premier sort of focused on the camera part of the expenditure, and we got social media being blasted with, really, cameras? So Mr. Avila, he might be a frequent visitor of this room, but he actually is reflecting the community right now. They want you to do more than policing, and they want you to do it now. If we wait until our budget process, and we adopt something at the end of February, will it really be on the ground in the summer? Well, what I have moved is a program that's already been designed, properly costed out, and was proposed to the federal government. It was one of the programs that we asked of the federal government. But what I'm looking at is, can we actually build into our base some of these youth programs? This one, Towards Peace, takes all of the programs we already have and creates an integration table that pulls them together, so that the young man leaving the police diversion program, if he needs more, there's someone to make sure that happens after they let him go. And I didn't pull this out of my own hat. I spent all day yesterday working with staff to say, what do you think would make the most impact right now? What is the best thing to do with the resources we have? If we were going to stick our necks out and spend more money, let's spend for impact. What's your very, very best design program that's ready to go? Now, they would say to you, you know, you could reduce that to 6 months of dollars. You could change the numbers. That's up to them. But I'm saying we really need to reflect our community. That's our job as politicians, to reflect what community wants. And right now, they want you to make a solid, impactful, and immediate investment in addressing the roots of violence. I'm not a person who likes to add to the budget. You know that about me. But that's why I'm moving this now, because it's needed now. It can't wait for a hiring that might happen after next summer. Those are my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. I just want to inform you that I will have to be moving your motion 1B out of order. Clerks have notified me, and I'll give the rationale, that what's before the committee is the Toronto Police Services operating budget to fund a specific program. Councillor Carroll's motion is to amend the social development SDFA budget, which is different. So just on a procedural motion, I will have to rule it out of order. If this does happen to come to council in the proper form, it would be in order, but just for the...
So on a point of order, the proper form would be I can serve it to council as a notice of motion. There's still written notice of motion time right now?
Yeah, I think there's still time, but if Council Speaker can...
Yeah, Councillor Carroll, I would recommend that you bring it forward as a member's motion, and I would be more than happy to second that motion.
Okay.
I thank you very much for that. Thank you.
So again, just on procedural, that was the reason why, and so I will have to rule that out of order. The second motion, again, it's a little broader in context, so that is actually fine. Even though it's kind of related, there's a broader context. It's just because it's very specific to a specific budget that has to be ruled out of order. So, okay.
Can I just, on a point of order, just clarify, because the motion itself does mention, sorry, not the motion, but the letter in front of us does mention the SDFA budget. It's just the motion isn't specific to it. But
well, again, because it's related to this item. Now, if this item had been brought as a walk-on or a separate item from BU 8.10 with the proper notice, it would have been fine. It's just because it's attached and related. That's the only reason that can't be. So, but again, the second motion is fine from my perspective. So, okay. Other speakers, Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much. Before I echo some of Councillor Carroll's remarks, I'd like to put forward a motion that City Council requests the City Manager to report back during the 2020 budget process on a requirement that any funding increase to Toronto Police Services budget to address crime must be matched with funding of twice that amount to programs and services that address the root causes of violence and poverty reduction. It's often very, very easy for politicians in instances like this, and we see this reoccurring over and over again, for politicians to rush to put money together to give police resources in times of crisis like this. And that's like, I think it's a natural response to say we need more police in times of increased gun violence. I think it's a genuine natural response. But what I think is more difficult, and what troubles me about the motion as it stands, which I will be supporting, but what troubles me is it ignores the root causes. It's saying, and it's barely a band-aid, it's saying let's deal with it at the very end and help catch more criminals, rather than actually help prevent crime. Like CCTV cameras, which I understand are above and beyond this amount, but additional cars and police services just catches criminals faster. Doesn't actually do anything to reduce the amount of gun crime, right? It might push it into different corners. It might mean we catch the people that are perpetrating it at a quicker rate. But it seems to me like it's missing part of the point. So I will be supporting the mayor's motion. But I think if we're going to say it's important to catch the people that are committing these crimes, then it's doubly important for us to say we have to do something to prevent them in the first place. And I think if you asked any expert, either someone with lived experience, someone in the offices at the Dalalana School of Public Health, or maybe even the officers on the front line, what would be your top 10 things to actually reduce violence in our city? You know where surveillance would probably be? It'd probably be 9th or 10th. You know where programs like Towards Peace, like alleviating the root causes of violence through addressing issues of poverty and inequality would be? Pretty high on that list for most of them. There may be some juggling around of those, but it'd probably be pretty high. But it's the more difficult thing to do. It takes longer, it doesn't have immediate payoffs, and the violence might not get any better in the next week, month, or year. But over the long term, that's where we should be making the investments. But rather than say, let's take money from police and put it into these services, I'm saying no. if we're going to put money into police, let's put twice as much into the cure, into prevention, rather than the end of pipe. Let's just put twice as much. Let's not take it away from one pocket, because people need to be safe and feel safe now. But let's make sure for the next generation that they're not going to be in this same situation. Because I think that that's all we're really doing. If all we're saying is we're going to catch the criminals faster, is we're leading down that same road. So I'm not 100% confident this will pass today or even be in order at this stage. But I would suggest that this is the type of direction that we should be going as a city. With that, I will also support Councillor Carroll's motion. I think the federal government, who seem to have it right by calling their program the National Crime Prevention Strategy, which funds SDFA projects rather than simply funding police. That seems to be the right course that we should take. So let's get the money we need from them, but let's also make it reflective in our own budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nunziata and Bradford. Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor McKelvey had questions. Okay, we have questions of the mover.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Layton, your motion is very specific on twice. And I'm just wondering, you are asking for a report back, but can it be broader than that? Because maybe it's 3 times, or maybe it's 1 time, or maybe it's reallocation. Like, I get where you're going in principle, but the twice is very specific.
So twice was, and it was more symbolic. One of my drafts of this had 3 times, and several of my colleagues said perhaps twice was appropriate, and don't go for 3 times. And then the drafts of this motion looked at an entire shift. Take the $1 billion that we give police, and let's make sure we're spending $2 billion on poverty reduction, or on youth services, or like let's change the whole budget like we do in our taxing strategy. Over time, what we did was we shift the tax burden towards residential taxes from commercial. I actually kind of envisioned that the city manager could come back with the same thing, saying in time we might actually need less policing budget and want to continue the investment in poverty reduction. It's quite arbitrary, I will admit, the twice. I would prefer it to be 10 times. I thought that this was a saleable number to do.
So are you prepared that staff come back with a recommendation that's not necessarily twice, but has other measures that would be based on evidence and things they're looking at? It could be more, it could be less, could be reallocation, could be a shift in strategy. If
they came back with something that said this is what you needed to address the root causes of violence, and this is the level of investment, and they did so based on our existing, like, these aren't new plans, I didn't bring them with me, but the poverty reduction plan, the youth, our youth plan for youth, if they came back and said we can implement these with this level of resources, then I'd be happy with it.
So they can look at that also in terms of like ability to spend.
Well, let's
ability to execute and ability to deliver.
Sure, but let's be clear. What they've actually been instructed to do for the most part is come back with no increase, or come back with an inflationary increase, not with double the increase to the police budget. And that's what I'm trying to get to, is we should let our staff be bold and come back with larger asks than what they've been instructed to by either the city manager or the mayor's office, and through the budget committee by way of a letter from the mayor's office. Give them that latitude to say, if you're going to put a number on what you need to increase the police budget by to address the gun crime, then let's look at allowing staff from SDFA, staff from Children's Services, staff from Parks and Rec to come forward with asks that are above what the city has, or what the city manager or council has said is the maximum ask they can come up with.
So ultimately, it's about a better coordination between our police budget and our SDFA budget.
I want us to understand that the police budget isn't about enforcement, that budgets like SDFA, budgets like the Parks and Recreation budget, our library budget, all of those things are about actually alleviating the root causes of violence, not more money to police.
So they should be looked at in parallel.
Sure. Another way to put it is we should put resources that will actually have a long-standing impact on reducing the causes of violence.
Thank you. So Bradford, you had a question too.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker, and thanks for the motion. I had some similar questions the language in the motion. Could we get that on the screen again? So when I agree with all of the sentiments and the importance to address the root cause of violence, and I recall, our chief making the comments that a 5-year-old doesn't start off wanting to shoot someone. Things happen in their lives along the way that lead to those circumstances, and I think that's what you're getting at here. The motion, the way it's written, I think kind of what Councillor McKelvey was pointing out there is it's not one thing, it's not just an increase to the police budget, it's supplementary supports, wraparound services that address the root causes here. I guess the question is, are you really interested, is there an interest in perhaps a value for money assessment of the money that we're spending across all these different buckets? So we're going to spend 1.5 million on additional police resources, which I could say I had a meeting in my community 2 weeks ago and they want that. But value for money as it relates to addressing gun crime and gun violence in the city on all the different tools that we can do, would that be helpful?
We have a poverty reduction strategy. We have our youth services strategy. I can't remember what the actual youth. So we have plans in place that have been developed by experts, by our city staff, and by people with lived experience.
Right.
I'm saying implement those. So look at the the Towards Peace program. This is a program we have on the books. We can roll out faster. Staff have indicated it's got good value. So those are the types of things that I think we could would serve us well if we were investing in that side of the equation. Like we keep going by the statistics, right? We keep going by the statistics. Well, the police, there's more police patrols. That sounds great. And it probably makes people feel a whole lot safer. We're solving more gun crime. Fantastic. That's great. But it has nothing to do with reducing the amount of gun crime, which is what we should, is investments in other programs do, like our strategy to address poverty, like our issues ensuring that our youth have opportunities and access to services. That's what actually reduces it. But you're not going to be able to break it down in such a clear-cut manner as a comparison of having more police on the beat, because these are long-term strategies. These are investments in our community, rather than just simply, well, a measure of safety is the number of people that are arrested for gun crime. That's not a measure of safety.
Well, I think that actually I would push back and suggest that there are metrics that we can look at with respect to safety in our neighborhoods, and the fact that we're here right now is because we're having another increase in gun violence and shootings and deaths in the city of Toronto this year.
And our response to this is our response to this increase is exactly the same response we've had every other time.
Well,
more money to police, rather than actually looking at the root causes.
What if the budget?
And I'm not saying take money away from police. What I'm saying is make a commitment. If you're putting money into police, make a commitment to actually going at the root causes. Don't just continue down the same mistaken path you've done before.
I think we all agree that we need to address the root causes.
And I'm glad you'll support my motion.
Well, first of all, your motion says, well, let's read your motion, because it says to address crime. And I think like a lot of what the Toronto Police Services does addresses crime. So the language I would have used was gun violence, because that's what the letter and the item is that we're responding to today. So, for example, that's an amendment I would make. I'd also say that
gun violence isn't the only thing that a crime that's a result of poverty, of inequality, of youth not having access to services.
Councillor Layton, I'm looking at item BU 8.10, which is increased levels of gun violence. That's the item that we're responding.
Yes.
So that's the language I would use.
But is that all that the police are going to be using these additional callback?
We heard from them today, and that was what they were saying. That's what this money is directed towards.
You really think that the exact amounts that we're addressing here are going to go just to additional gun violence? No, it's going to an enhanced police service.
This motion is proposing a ratio, and I think the language that you said yourself was it's an arbitrary number.
It is.
And I don't think that arbitrary numbers is the way that we should be addressing such a complex and difficult issue.
If you don't think that the causes of root violence and combating the causes of root violence are easily
Are you
twice
open
as
to an
important
amendment
as
on the
enforcement.
motion?
I'm just saying, if you don't think that they're easily twice as important as arresting people at the end of the day, then feel free to vote against my
It
motion.
would have been nice if you talked to people about it beforehand.
Thank you, Councillor. The time is up. Councillor Carroll.
I'd like to respond to that final comment, because this is coming from a councillor who's also walked on items about a variety of things at this committee, which is nice. It is nice to have the time to go around and talk to people. The mayor didn't talk to any of us, or perhaps he talked to the budget chief, which I granted he should have. Didn't talk to any of us before he put the motion on the agenda, and we have 5 days with it. So we do our very best, Councillor Bradford, to get motions in front of colleagues. I've done you that favor when I've had it in advance. I did not have it in advance. We completed this
Did
motion.
you write it this morning?
It was written.
We talked yesterday.
It was written last night.
Councillor Carroll, I will comment on the motion when I. Well, no, just with regard, again, I do respect where Councillor Bradford has come. This is the first time I'm also seeing the motion here. There's a line, as you could appreciate, on as I moved that Councillor Carroll's motions were not in order. This is a little bit broader in the fact that the councillor is saying we're going to bring it to 20. If this didn't have the 2020 budget process on, it wouldn't happen. There's a fine line here. I think I do recognize the fine line. Would it have been better to have been circulated to us to have that opportunity? It always is, specifically the chair. I haven't had that opportunity, but when I did look at that, it is in order. Technically, maybe not. I could rule it out of order, but again, in the spirit of what I think everyone is trying to achieve here, that conversation has to continue, and I think in that, this motion at least does that. Potentially, can we amend it? This is going up to council. We can look at it differently, but this is a conversation at a later period, and I think that conversation prior to council, if we do have to amend it, again, as I said, this is what it's like, unfortunately, when you have motions that come and we haven't had the opportunity to look at them prior, because we do need to get some advice, and it may end up having to speak to somebody else. So on that, that's why, hence, I did not. It is in order. But there is that argument to not, but I chose to consider that this is an appropriate motion. Councillor Carroll, questions?
Can I still ask my question?
Oh, yeah.
So I just want to ask a question, because we've in the questioning, we've gone from, this is a broad mandate to staff to report back to me, but then we've gone burrowing down into the specifics. Can I just ask what your expectation is of, it's a question of the mover.
Councillor Layton, you have a question.
It's a question of the mover.
I'm so sorry.
Can I just ask how much leeway you're giving staff here? Because I think it might give councillors comfort. This is a policy motion. So, you're asking them to report back during the 2020 budget process. It's not necessarily going to lead to specifically what happens in the budget process. In my perfect world, I would have moved a motion that says when there's a one-time infusion to police services to address gun crime from other orders of government, can we double it with that? All of those types of things are things that you want staff to consider and report back what they think is the best way to nail down a policy? You're okay with giving them that much leeway in their report back?
So the reason why it was pushed to a report back rather than direction in the next budget is it may result that we want to put quite a bit more into social services and SDFA and alleviating the root causes of violence than we do in the police, to be honest. And I hope we give that opportunity. The reason why I wouldn't say it's only at one-time infusions of cash from other level of government is one, I don't have a high level of confidence in either of those other two levels of government in making the right decisions here. And the second piece is, I don't think it's only one time. Like, I think if we take our buckets and say, we spend this much on poverty reduction, that might be able to include things like public transit and affordable housing and all of these other things, and we take the bucket we give the police, we may want to actually structurally make that change, as I mentioned earlier, far beyond just one-time infusions of money.
But you'd be okay receiving back staff's best advice. And so if staff were to report back, every penny we give the police is to address crime, so here's our best advice, you'd be happy to wait till the report comes back to take that.
That's why
craft the
it was a
policy.
request for a report back.
Right.
What I would
We can
suggest,
do
however,
this
though,
work then.
is we can't be stuck in this notion that we have to have this increase coming out of our we have to have this increase in coming out of individual budgets and no more, and yet the police budget can continue to go down a path where it has enormous increases on an annual basis, but we're not making the investments that we need in SDFA, in our library system, in youth and poverty reduction, the root causes of violence. Rather, we're focusing on Band-Aid solutions. And so that's what I want staff to be given the confidence that they can come back with a budget or a recommendation in the budget that is more reflective of how do you actually address the root causes of violence.
But it's the policy you're looking for, not the dollar number.
I'm fine if it's just the policy. If they come back and say, over the course of time, we want to see a increase in the spending on these social services because it will result in actually a reduction in crime and therefore less of a need for an investment in enforcement down the road.
Okay, Mr. Chief, thank you for that indulgence. I'm clear now.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other,
I have a question, then I want to speak, please.
Councillor Nunziata,
Okay,
questions?
so Councillor Layton, would you support an amendment in your motion rather than
You're not allowed to actually speak to the committee. I'm sorry. Councillor Nunziata,
can you put the motion on the screen, please?
the amendment.
No, just put the motion, Councillor Layton's motion. I'm asking Councillor Layton questions.
Okay, this question's on,
So when the city manager reports back, would you support an amendment, a friendly amendment, rather than hold on, twice the amount, just to match the amount?
So I won't accept that as a friendly amendment, and I'll tell you why. And I appreciate that you're making it in the friendliest of ways, but I want to reinforce to staff and to the city that we are concerned and ready to make the investments in the root causes of violence rather than simply a Band-Aid solution. Again, not to take away from the need for enforcement or the need to invest in it, but to say we think it's more important. If you want to say 1.1 times, if you want to say we have to make it clear that our priority is actually reducing the causes of violence and not simply catching more criminals.
Councillor Layton, I agree with you, and I think we all agree on where you want to go, but I think the wording of your motion is to say twice. I think that it would be appropriate to wait for the staff to report back to us and give us some suggestions, recommendations, rather than put twice the amount. It's a little premature because at that time we really don't know what the staff report will come back, what the staff would recommend in this year's budget. So I then would move an amendment to delete that and put match. Okay.
when you speak, you can move the amendment, and we'll have to determine whether or not we support it.
I would recommend that we delete twice the amount and just match. Just insert match. And also what I would like to move as well is a motion that the city council requests the city manager as well, when he reports back, to report back during the 2020 budget process on opportunities for partnerships with existing agencies to fund programs and services that address the root causes of violence and poverty reduction. Because I think there's an opportunity as well, rather than the funding portion of it that Councillor Layton's motion is to partner with some of the agencies, because there are a number of agencies that are out there that I think that we could partner with, which we give funding to and maybe increase their budgets and actually provide more of the services that they're And the reason, and I'll speak now, the reason why we're increasing the police budget, and we have, is because we had a hiring freeze. And so we are way below staffing complement, and that's why we're catching up now, and that's why when we do increase the police budget, we're increasing it to get back where we were. And the reality is, and in my ward where I've had the majority of homicides, and I will be working with the youth in my ward, trying to organize a youth forum and a town hall with the youth and talk about what they would, what their issues are, what they would like to see improvements in their community, especially the Falstaff community where we had the 16-year-old that was shot in the stairway. And so I'm going to be working with the youth, and I can tell you that I had a public meeting shortly after the homicide, and we had over 200 people. The chief was there, and we heard from all the mothers, including the mother of the 16-year-old, that we want more police officers. The biggest issue for them is we want to see more police officers. We want security cameras. We want lighting at Toronto Housing. And that was their main concern, was we want to see more police officers around Falstaff. And so I am responding to my community, because my community is asking for increased security and increased staffing. And so that is why we need to, and we have increased the police budget, is to target these areas that are having difficulties and that are going through, in the past couple months, to bring the community at ease. The community is now saying, I get emails from residents saying, I'm afraid to walk the street, I'm afraid to go out, I'm afraid, and that's why we need the increase in policing. I hope, Councillor Layton, I hope you would support my amendment as far as the matching, and also my amendment as far as working with other agencies, because I do know with the youth hubs, there is the Girls and Boys Club that would want to get very involved, and we received their letter last year when there was a motion by Councillor Matlow asking for increase in hubs. They asked that we defer that because they wanted to work with the city and work with the community on identifying locations where these youth hubs should be located. So I think that we need to partner with these agencies, so I'm asking for that report as well.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Bradford.
On the item very quickly. On a motion, I don't think I'm going to move it at this time, but I would like to. This is such a heartbreaking and emotional issue that we face in our city. Beaches East York has experienced some of this over the course of the summer, and we had a meeting up at Parma Court in Wakanda Place about 2 weeks ago. And we had over 100 residents come out, primarily from TCH, the property there, but from the broader community as well. And I can tell you that those residents are scared, they're not satisfied, and they do want to see additional investments in our Toronto Police's response. They were saying that they don't feel safe in their community, and the stories that they were sharing with everyone in the room was it was heartbreaking. We know that is one component of addressing gun violence in this city, and that it is a whole lot more in addressing the core factors that really lead people into a life of crime and violence. And I appreciate Councillor Layton's motion. That is what he is trying to emphasize, and it's symbolic. And I appreciate that. We do have a lot of programs that are looking to address that, but of course we need to do more, because again, you can look at the data and you can look at the evidence, and we're not moving in the right direction. And so I was very grateful for having the superintendent of Division 54, 55 to come out and to listen and to speak with the residents. And he will be advocating to have a police officer as part of the neighborhood community officer program, dedicated teams in neighborhoods that are building these relationships and building trust with the community, and that's a huge important part of it as well. So it's a complicated issue. This injection of capital, 1.5 million from the city and the other levels of government, is important, and frankly, we should be moving forward with that, and I think that's the intention. But of course not at the expense, and it's not, but not with the other services investments in our communities that we know are necessary to address the root causes of violence in the city. Thank you.
Okay, any other speakers? I think, okay, I'll speak last. First off, I will be supporting Councillor Layton's motion and the amendment. I recognize the spirit of what Councillor Layton is trying to do. Regardless of how it's worded, I think if there needs to be revisions as it moves forward to executive and to full council, that would probably be good. But I don't want the words to be lost, or I don't want the words to lose the intent of what he's attempting to do. So it may end up being that we have to look at this a little bit further as it moves up. Hence why I'll seek reporting, because I do understand, I do agree with him what he's attempting to do, but we may need to work this a little bit better so by the time it gets to council, it makes sense for everybody. I do want to stress, though, in this conversation that we're having today, that we have made investments in community programs that help kids and families, and we're going to continue to do that. I just want to make sure we understand that I recognize the importance of gun violence and crime. We all are impacted differently in our different wards. Sometimes, and again, when you're looking at what happened in the summer, Councillor Nunziata is predominantly, she's having those challenges, as are other of us in the city. But we are making the investments, and I just want to remind everybody that today we're approving urgent funding by a request from the police for immediate operating and matching funds for the federal and provincial government. So that's what we're here for, and that's a good thing. And the more that we put into it is good. So that is really what we're doing. But don't forget, when we're looking at, and we've seen the programs that we're doing, the immediate steps to address gun violence that staff have done. We've already proved that we're working on that. The question is, are we doing enough? And are we doing it quick enough? I think that's probably what more the conversation is. But we are doing immediate issues. We're dealing with long-term strategies to try to prevent gun violence. We have the upcoming Youth Services Program Review. Again, is going to be identifying, are we doing enough? Should we be doing more? More than likely, we'll suggest we need to do more. And I tend to, when I'm looking at these reports, I want to look at those fulsome reports and get a sense of what we need to do properly. Sometimes when we make these decisions on council or on committee, we don't have the full context behind us, and that's one of the frustrations. Sometimes we feel the frustration of the community, hence we react in the way we do sometimes. But then I wonder and question, are we making the right decision for what we need to do? And sometimes it's not sure. That's why sometimes when we have staff bring these fulsome reports, it gives us the opportunity to do that. And again, also too with the federal government, we are working with the federal government. I understand that they haven't approved a lot of some of the stuff in the National Crime Prevention Strategy, but that's not to say that they won't. I do know that the Mayor's Office and others are working actively with the federal government, and my hope is maybe by council, maybe before that, they will come forward and fund some of these initiatives that we, and then the one that Councillor Carroll will probably be bringing. So on that, I get it, but again, we have a process. The process is incredibly frustrating sometimes, but I just want to thank everybody for coming, and again, I'll be supporting the motion by Councillor Layton, and of course the amendment, and I'll work with you, council. We'll figure out what needs to happen, executive into council. So on that,
Mr.
we
Chairman,
have.
if I could ask permission, I will withdraw my motion as far as the match, amending Councillor Layton's motion. Motion 2.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Carroll's going to remove her amendment to the motion. Okay. Okay, the first motion will be motion 1A by Councillor Carroll. And it will be put up on the screen. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Motion 2 by Councillor Layton. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Motion 3B by Councillor Nunziata. Oh, sorry. Oh, you have your Councillor Nunziata, not the amendment, but the. Yeah, okay. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Item as amended. All in favor? Opposed? You can have a recorded vote on that last one.
On the item as amended, all in favor, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Bradford, Councillor Carroll, Councillor Nunziata, Councillor McKelvey,
Councillor Layton, probably.
yes, and Councillor Layton. That carries unanimously.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate